I want to be hired. The security guard looked Annie up and down, then let out a quiet laugh. A job interview? He asked, as if he had just heard something ridiculous. You're saying you came here to apply for a job? He tilted his head, not bothering to hide the contempt on his face. Looking like that? A few people passing by began to slow down. Some turned their heads. Others pretended to check their phones. But it was obvious they were listening. Annie tightened her grip on the strap of her old backpack. Her fingers turned pale from the pressure, but she did not step back. Yes, sir, she said, her voice soft but clear. I'm here to apply for the first-year systems analysis internship program. The security guard blinked, as if she had suddenly started speaking another language. What? The entry-level systems analysis intern position, Annie repeated. It's the program Whitmore Systems posted for the junior engineering team. That made him laugh again. Louder this time. The junior engineering team, he repeated, glancing at the receptionist beside him, as if inviting her to join in the mockery. Listen, young lady, this building doesn't hire delivery people at the front desk, and we don't need any extra cleaning staff today either. Annie's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice remained calm. I'm not here to deliver anything, and I'm not applying to be a cleaner. The guard waved his hand dismissively, looking almost tired of her stubbornness. Then take a good look at yourself. Honestly, do you think someone walks into Whitmore Systems looking like this and gets hired in technology? A man standing near the elevator let out a small laugh, then quickly raised his hand to his mouth and coughed to hide it. Annie heard it clearly. She lifted her head. My clothes don't know how to code, she said. The smile on the security guard's face faded. His eyes grew stern. That's cute, he said, but being clever won't get you upstairs. I just need someone to look at my resume. Your resume? He glanced at her faded backpack. What's in there, a lunch order? No, Annie replied. My resume. The guard leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice as if he were giving her a lesson. Let me explain something to you. This is the headquarters of a major corporation. People don't just walk in off the street and demand an interview because they saw a job posting online. I didn't just happen to walk by. Then what did you do? I prepared. The guard was about to laugh again, but at that moment, the private elevator doors at the end of the lobby opened. The whole area suddenly went quiet. Several people turned at the same time. Ethan Whitmore stepped out with two executives. His suit fit perfectly, down to the last stitch. In his hand was a cup of coffee, still steaming. He took 3 steps toward the main entrance, then stopped when he noticed the small crowd gathered near security. What's going on here? He asked. His voice was not loud, but it was enough to silence everyone. Why is my lobby so noisy this early in the morning? The security guard's attitude changed instantly. His back straightened. His voice softened too, almost sweet. Mr. Whitmore, I'm very sorry for the disturbance. He forced a smile and gestured toward Annie. This young woman came in looking, well, he paused deliberately, long enough for the insult to fall on its own. Rather shabby, sir. At first, I thought she was here for a delivery or maintenance work. But now she says she wants to apply for the entry-level systems analysis internship. The receptionist lowered her eyes. Annie did not. The guard continued, eager to prove he was only doing his job. I was just trying to keep things in order, sir. She has no access badge, no appointment, and no one to vouch for her. Yet she keeps insisting that someone look at her resume. Ethan's gaze shifted to Annie. He looked at her old hoodie, the backpack with frayed edges, the folder she held tightly against her chest. Her shoes had been cleaned, but they still could not hide the marks of time. Then he turned back to the security guard. An intern? Yes, sir, the guard answered quickly, still wearing his eager-to-please smile. That's what she says. At that moment, a man standing behind Ethan tilted his head slightly and looked at Annie. Annie recognized him immediately. Daniel Reed, Senior Director of Systems Analysis. On the company website, there was a polished photo of him standing beside Ethan Whitmore. Beneath it was an article Annie had read so many times that even with her eyes closed, she could still remember the headline. Daniel looked at her for a few more seconds. Then he turned away. Ethan looked at Annie. You want to apply for the systems analysis internship? Yes, Mr. Whitmore. You missed the application deadline. I know. Then that's the end of it. Not necessarily. The security guard gave a small scoff, as if someone had finally said what he had been trying to say all along. You see, sir? Ethan raised one hand. The guard fell silent immediately. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. "Annie Johnson." "Miss Johnson, do you have an appointment?" "No." "A referral?" "No." "A degree?" "No." "Anyone in this company willing to vouch for you?" "No." Ethan gave her a faint smile. It was not quite mocking, but it was not friendly either. "Then help me understand. Why are you standing in my lobby asking for a job you are not qualified for on paper?" Annie did not lower her head. "Because I can do the work." The answer made Ethan pause for a moment. Not because he believed her, but because of the way she said it so directly, without begging, without dressing it up, without trying to make herself look pitiful. He took a sip of coffee. "What experience do you have?" Annie adjusted the folder in her hands. "I repair old laptops on weekends at a small shop on 63rd Street. I've rebuilt old servers from discarded parts. I studied system architecture through free online courses and textbooks borrowed from the library. I've written monitoring scripts for local businesses that couldn't afford commercial software. I once helped a neighborhood clinic reorganize its patient check-in computers after their network kept crashing every Monday morning. I learned load balancing by testing old machines until they shut down, then figuring out why they failed." Ethan listened for a few seconds. Then he laughed. "You've repaired laptops and helped a clinic deal with a few frozen computers," he said, still smiling. "And from that, you believe you're ready to walk into Whitmore Systems and work in systems analysis?" Annie felt heat rise in her neck, but she remained still. "I believe I deserve to be evaluated," she said. Ethan looked at the two executives beside him, then back at her. "Those are not the same thing." The security guard saw his chance and stepped forward, wearing the smile of a man who was certain he stood on the winning side. "Exactly, sir. That's what I've been trying to explain to her." He turned to Annie, his tone full of condescension. "This is Whitmore Systems, not some repair shop on the south side. Mr. Whitmore hires people from the top universities in the country. People who walk in here have master's degrees, internships at major corporations, recommendation letters from respected professors. You can't just show up in a hoodie, say a few things about broken laptops, and expect the CEO to pull out a chair for you." He kept going, growing more confident because no one stopped him. "No offense, young lady, but you need to know your place. There's nothing wrong with honest work. Deliveries, cleaning, helping at the front desk, all of that is respectable. But systems analysis?" He shook his head, then glanced at Ethan with a flattering smile. "Mr. Whitmore built a billion-dollar company. He can't waste his entire morning just because someone walks in off the street and thinks she's special." Ethan did not stop him. Annie heard every word, and in that moment, she remembered something her mother had once told her. After a week in which the landlord, a teacher, and a store manager had all looked down on her. "People like to judge the packaging, Annie, because opening the box takes too much effort." Annie took a slow breath. Then she lifted her head and looked straight at Ethan Whitmore. "Here is the English version with natural grammar and storytelling flow. You can look at my resume," Annie said. Before Ethan could answer, she opened her worn backpack and took out a black folder. It was the same folder she had carried all the way from the south side to this elegant building. Annie placed it on the security desk, right in front of Ethan. "If, after reading it, you still think I don't belong here, I'll leave on my own." The receptionist stopped typing. The smile on the security guard's face slowly faded. Daniel glanced at the folder, then quickly looked away. But he was not quick enough to hide the irritation in his eyes. Ethan stared at the folder without touching it. "You actually brought a resume?" he asked. "Yes, sir. I already told you. This opportunity is closed." "Then reject me after you read it." Her answer was so simple that, for a moment, no one knew how to respond. Ethan looked at Annie again. This time, he did not look at her plain clothes, her old shoes, or the frayed backpack on her shoulder. He looked directly at her face. Daniel cleared his throat. "Ethan, we're about to be late for the investor call." Ethan did not turn toward him. The security guard quickly added, "Sir, if you'd like, I can have someone escort her out." Annie stood still. Ethan set his coffee cup down. After a few seconds of silence, he reached for the folder. No one was laughing anymore. He removed the rubber band around it and opened the first page. At first, his expression remained cold, almost indifferent. But as his eyes moved down the lines, that indifference slowly began to disappear. The first page was Annie's resume, but it was not like the resumes Ethan was used to seeing. There was no prestigious university name, no polished internship at a major corporation. No elegant language carefully designed to impress. There was only work, dates, projects, systems, and problems she had solved with almost nothing in her hands. Diagnosing used laptops, volunteer network repairs, setting up workstations for a community clinic, rebuilding servers, completing open course certifications, studying system models on her own, analyzing data flow. Ethan turned to the next page. Annie quietly watched his hand. She noticed that he was turning the pages more slowly now. Ethan read for a few more seconds. Then he half closed the folder, keeping one finger inside to mark the page. "Miss Johnson," he said. This time, his voice was different. Annie lifted her head. "Yes, sir?" Ethan looked toward the private elevator, then back at her. "Follow me." The security guard immediately stepped aside. Daniel's face went stiff. Annie slipped the backpack over her shoulder and followed Ethan across the grand lobby. Inside the private elevator, the air carried a faint scent of coffee and expensive cologne. Ethan pressed the button for the 32nd floor. Daniel stepped in beside him, but not too close. Annie stood near the back wall, holding the folder tightly against her chest. In the shining elevator doors, her reflection looked much smaller than she felt inside. At first, Ethan said nothing. He continued reading another page while the elevator rose. Daniel simply watched the numbers change above the doors. Finally, without looking up, Ethan said, "You understand that confidence is not a skill." "Yes, sir." "And hardship is not an achievement." "I know." He glanced at her. "Many people work hard. That doesn't mean they can analyze enterprise systems." "No, sir," Annie replied. "But it does mean they know how to keep solving problems even when no one gives them the right tools." Daniel gave a quiet laugh. "That sounds nice. It would look great in a scholarship essay." Annie turned her head toward him. It also worked well enough for 3 local businesses that stopped losing appointments, orders, and patient records. Daniel's smile stayed on his face, but the corners of his mouth tightened. "Small systems are not the same as corporate infrastructure." "I never said they were." Ethan closed the folder. "Then what are you saying?" Annie looked directly at him. "I'm saying broken things usually behave honestly. A bad server doesn't care who built it. A slow network doesn't care who owns the building. If pressure is in the wrong place, it will show up somewhere. You just have to know where to look." For the first time, Ethan did not answer right away. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. It was much quieter than the lobby below. The thick carpet swallowed almost every footstep. On both sides were glass office walls, elegant rooms, and framed magazine covers hanging neatly along the hallway. In the photos, Ethan was shaking hands with governors, CEOs, and men who looked as if they had never waited long on hold with the electric company. A receptionist behind a curved desk immediately stood when Ethan stepped out. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." "Push the investor call back 10 minutes, Ethan said. Daniel turned sharply toward him. "Ethan, that call has been scheduled for 3 weeks. "Then they've already waited long enough," Ethan replied. "Another 10 minutes won't age them 10 years. The receptionist looked uncertain for a moment, but nodded. "Yes, sir." Daniel lowered his voice as they continued walking. "You're making this much bigger than it needs to be." "I read quickly," Ethan said. They passed through a pair of glass doors and entered Ethan's office. The room was spacious and bright, overlooking almost the entire city below. Ethan pointed to the chair in front of his desk. "Sit down." Annie sat carefully and placed her backpack beneath her feet. Daniel remained standing. "I should call human resources in here." "Not yet." "Legal?" "Not yet." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then what exactly is this?" "A conversation." "With a walk-in?" Ethan looked straight at him. "With someone you seem very eager for me not to discuss." Daniel offered a thin smile, the kind used to cover a crack before anyone else could notice it. "I'm protecting your time. That's my job." "No," Ethan said. "Your job is to analyze systems." Annie noticed Daniel's hand lightly touch the watch on his wrist. Ethan opened the folder again. "You rebuilt servers from discarded hardware?" "Yes." "Where?" "At a repair shop on 63rd Street. The owner let me use parts he couldn't resell." "Were you paid for that?" "Sometimes. Other times, I traded labor for equipment." Daniel scoffed softly. "That's not experience. That's just tinkering with old junk." Ethan looked back down at the folder, but he was no longer reading it the same way he had at first. Annie's resume was still not impressive by corporate standards. At least not yet. But something in those plain, practical lines had made Ethan stop. He closed the folder and placed his palm on top of it. "Miss Johnson," he said, "I can't promise you anything today. I didn't expect you to, but I'll give you an interview." Daniel turned immediately. "Ethan, one interview," Ethan repeated, his eyes still on Annie. "With me, Daniel, and Human Resources." This afternoon, Annie felt the first real shift of the day. A very small door had just opened. "Yes, sir." Ethan pushed the folder back toward her. "Don't be late." Annie stood and took the folder with both hands. Daniel stepped forward and opened the door for her. But the gesture did not feel polite. As Annie passed, he leaned close enough for only her to hear. "You should have stayed downstairs." Annie stopped. Then she turned to him and answered calmly, "I've been downstairs long enough." If Annie's story touched your heart, please like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know where you are watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories about courage, justice, and second chances. Then she walked away before Daniel could respond. The elevator doors closed behind Annie with a soft sound that seemed smaller than the moment itself. The executive floor felt different from the lobby downstairs. It was quieter, slower, built for people who never had to rush for buses or check bank balances before buying groceries. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out across Chicago. Framed magazine covers lined the hallway walls. Ethan Whitmore stood smiling in every one of them. Annie followed the receptionist toward a waiting area outside the conference wing. "Mr. Whitmore asked me to keep you here until the interview," the woman said politely. "Can I get you coffee? Water?" "Water is fine." The woman nodded and left. Annie sat down, placing the black folder on her lap. Across the hall, people moved in and out of glass offices carrying tablets and folders. Nobody looked at her directly, but she felt it anyway. The quick glances, the small pauses, the silent question, "What is she doing up here?" A few minutes later, the conference room doors opened. Daniel stepped out first. He saw her immediately. The smile he wore in meetings disappeared. "You're still here." Annie looked up. "Mr. Whitmore asked me to stay." Daniel folded his arms. "You really think this ends with an interview? I didn't come here because I thought it would be easy." "No." He gave a small laugh. "You came because someone told you hard work always wins." Annie said nothing. Daniel walked closer. "You know what happens in places like this?" he asked quietly. "People with experience compete. People with credentials compete. They fail all the time." He looked at the folder on her lap. "And you walked in with repair shop projects and community work. Those projects solved problems. So do plumbers." The words hung there. Annie looked at him steadily. "Then maybe more executives should think like plumbers." Daniel's smile vanished. Before he could answer, Ethan's office door opened. "Daniel," his voice carried across the hallway. Daniel stepped back at once. Ethan stood at his doorway holding Annie's CV. His coffee was gone now. Reading glasses rested in one hand. Inside, both of you. The office felt quieter than before. Ethan sat behind his desk while Annie and Daniel took seats opposite him. He opened the folder again. "South Ashland Clinic called back," he said. Annie blinked. Daniel looked over. Ethan continued reading. "Mrs. Alvarez said their patient intake delays dropped by 40% after your changes." Annie nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. She also said you refused payment." "It wasn't my system." Ethan looked up. "What does that mean?" "It means they needed help. I knew how to fix it." Daniel leaned back. "Helping a clinic doesn't qualify someone for enterprise infrastructure." "No," Ethan said calmly, "but it qualifies her for honesty." Daniel went quiet. Ethan flipped another page. "You rebuilt a server from discarded parts?" "Yes." "For what?" "A neighborhood tutoring center." "Why?" "Their computers kept crashing." "And you fixed it?" "For less than $100. Daniel laughed softly. "That isn't scalable." Annie finally turned toward him. "Not everyone needs scalable," she said. "Sometimes people just need working." The room settled. Outside the windows, clouds moved over the city. Ethan closed the folder halfway. "You know what I don't understand?" he asked. Annie waited. "You clearly know systems. You work. You study. You solve problems." He rested one hand on the CV. "So, why walk into my lobby instead of applying again next year?" Daniel glanced at him. Annie looked down at her hands for the first time since entering the building. Then she answered, "Because sometimes waiting costs too much." Ethan's expression changed slightly. "My mother works nights. Annie continued. Double shifts when they need her. Some weeks she barely sleeps. She looked back up. I can keep repairing laptops. I can keep taking small jobs. But eventually you have to stop waiting for doors to open. Daniel exhaled quietly through his nose. Ethan studied her. The room stayed silent long enough for the clock near the bookshelf to tick twice. Then Ethan pressed the intercom. Linda. Yes, Mr. Whitmore? Move HR to 2 o'clock. Daniel turned immediately. Ethan. 2 o'clock. Ethan repeated. The line clicked off. Daniel stared at him. You're serious? Yes. This isn't how we hire. Ethan leaned back in his chair. No, he said. It isn't. He looked at Annie again. But maybe that's the problem. For the first time since entering Whitmore Systems, Annie felt the room shift without anyone laughing. Ethan slid the folder closed. 1 interview, he said. That's all this is. Yes, sir. Daniel stood. His chair moved sharply against the carpet. As he reached the door, he paused. You know what your problem is? He asked Annie without turning. No. You still think talent is enough. He walked out. The door closed behind him. Ethan remained silent for several seconds. Then he looked toward the photograph of his wife on the shelf before turning back. Miss Johnson. Yes? Don't prove him right. Annie held the folder tighter. I won't. Annie left Ethan's office with the folder pressed against her side. The executive floor looked different now. Not friendlier, just quieter. The receptionist gave her a small nod as she passed. HR interview is at 2, she said. Please check in downstairs when you return. Thank you. Annie stepped into the elevator alone this time. The doors closed. Her reflection stared back from the polished metal. Same hoodie. Same backpack. Same worn sneakers. 4 hours earlier, those things had made people laugh. The elevator stopped on 26. 3 employees entered. 2 men and a woman. They noticed her immediately. One of the men glanced at the visitor badge clipped to her hoodie. Interview candidate, he asked casually. Annie nodded. What department? Systems analysis. The woman looked surprised. Really? Before Annie could answer, the other man laughed softly. Tough division, he said. Reed runs that place like the military. The woman lowered her voice. Not military, more like survival. The elevator reached the lobby. They stepped out together. The morning crowd had thinned. The same guard still stood behind the security desk. He saw Annie and straightened. Not out of respect, out of confusion. You're still here? She's returning later, the receptionist answered before Annie could speak. The guard looked past Annie toward the elevators. Mr. Whitmore actually kept her? Nobody answered. Annie walked toward the revolving doors. Outside, Chicago air hit colder than before. She checked her phone. 3 missed calls. Mum. A text sat beneath them. How did it go? Annie smiled faintly. Better than expected. The reply came almost immediately. Come home first. I made 40 minutes later, Annie pushed open the apartment door. The smell hit her before the warmth did. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, black pepper. Her mother stood near the stove still wearing navy scrubs from the night shift. Her eyes looked tired in the way people's eyes did after years of choosing work over sleep. Well, Annie set the folder down. I got an interview. Her mother froze. Interview? With Ethan Whitmore. The wooden spoon slipped from her hand and hit the counter. No. Yes. No, Annie. She laughed once. I mean no as in impossible. Annie smiled for the first time all day. Her mother walked over and touched her face. What happened? Annie sat at the kitchen table and told her everything. The lobby, the guard, the laughter, the meeting, the interview. Her mother listened without interrupting. When Annie finished, the room stayed quiet. Then her mother sat across from her. You know what scares me? Annie looked up. You belong there. The answer came too quickly. No, I don't. Yes, you do. Her mother folded her hands. That's what scares me. Annie looked down. The apartment was small. Old radiator, second-hand table. Bills clipped beneath a magnet on the fridge. Nothing in the room looked like Whitmore Systems. Her mother followed her eyes. This place kept us alive, she said softly. Never be ashamed of it. A knock interrupted them. Mrs. Alvarez stood outside carrying a pie dish. The clinic manager smiled when Annie opened the door. I heard somebody got an interview. Annie blinked. Already? Your mother called me 10 minutes ago. Her mother shrugged unapologetically. Mrs. Alvarez entered and placed the pie on the counter. Apple, she said, for luck. Then she turned serious. Whitmore called me this morning. Annie straightened. What? A man from their office asked about the clinic computers. She smiled slowly. I told them exactly what happened. Her mother looked up. Mrs. Alvarez continued. I told them our system was failing. I told them Annie fixed it. She looked at Annie directly. And I told them she refused money because she said the clinic needed it more. Silence settled around the kitchen. Her mother looked away first. Mrs. Alvarez smiled again. Eat something before you go back and impress rich people. Annie laughed quietly. 2 hours later, she stood outside Whitmore Systems again. This time the guard saw her coming before she reached the doors. He opened them himself. No smile, no apology, just a quick movement and lowered eyes. Annie walked inside. The receptionist handed her a visitor badge. Conference room C, she said. Annie clipped it on. As she crossed the lobby, she felt someone watching. Daniel stood near the elevators speaking with 2 managers. He ended the conversation the moment he saw her. The managers left. Daniel walked toward her. No smile, no greeting. He stopped close enough that she could see the reflection of the lobby lights in his watch. You came back. You expected me not to? He looked at the badge. People get excited after small victories. It wasn't a victory. Good. He nodded once. Because you haven't won anything. The elevator opened behind him. Daniel stepped inside. Before the doors closed, he looked at her one last time. HR interviews begin with technical review. Annie stayed still. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. I hope your repair shop experience was enough. The doors closed. Annie looked down at the visitor badge in her hand. Conference room C. Interview. 2 o'clock. She adjusted the strap of her backpack and walked toward the hallway. At the far end, a glass wall reflected the city skyline. For the first time since morning, she felt it. Not fear. Pressure. And pressure, she knew, always revealed weak points. Conference room C sat at the end of a hallway lined with framed patents and company awards. The glass walls were frosted halfway up, leaving only shadows visible inside. Annie stopped at the door and checked the time. Bir, Elia de Pema, 3 minutes early. The receptionist from upstairs appeared carrying a tablet. Miss Johnson? Yes. They're almost ready. Annie nodded. The woman gave her a quick look. Not at the clothes this time. At the folder. You should know, she said quietly. Mr. Whitmore doesn't usually sit in first interviews. Annie held the folder tighter. Then why is he here? The receptionist hesitated. I don't know. The door opened. Daniel stepped out first. He held a tablet in one hand and a thin folder in the other. Come in. The room was larger than Annie expected. Long conference table, screen mounted on the wall, pitcher of water, 3 chairs on one side, only one on the other. Ethan sat in the middle seat. Beside him was a woman in her 50s wearing glasses and a gray blazer. Miss Johnson, she said with a professional smile. I'm Linda Park, Human Resources Director. Annie nodded. Nice to meet you. Daniel remained standing near the screen. Sit. Annie took the chair opposite them. Linda opened a file. Your background is unusual. That's one way to say it, Daniel muttered. Linda ignored him. You have no formal internship experience, she continued. No university recommendations, no corporate references. No, but several community projects. Yes. Linda looked up. Why systems analysis? Annie answered without delay. Because systems tell the truth. Daniel leaned back. Linda waited. Annie continued. People hide things. Reports hide things. But systems don't. If something fails, the failure leaves traces. Daniel glanced toward Ethan. Ethan remained still. Linda asked another question. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Annie thought for a second. Working. Daniel smiled faintly. Linda smiled too. Doing what? Fixing things. Specific things? Whatever people stopped noticing because it always worked before. The room went quiet. Daniel tapped his pen. Ethan finally spoke. What happens when a system fails? Annie looked at him. Depends on the system. A hospital network. Delays. A bank. Losses. A logistics network. Supply chain disruption. Ethan folded his hands. A payroll system. Annie paused. Families miss rent. The answer sat in the room longer than the others. Linda wrote something down. Daniel stood. Technical portion. He walked to the screen. A network diagram appeared. Server clusters. Load balancing paths. Traffic maps. Whitmore branding sat in the corner. Daniel turned back. Corporate logistics infrastructure, he said. Simplified version. Annie studied it. You have 15 minutes, he continued. Find weaknesses. Linda looked surprised. Daniel, that's not standard procedure. She wants systems analysis. He looked directly at Annie. Let her analyze systems. Ethan said nothing. The timer on the screen started. Annie leaned forward. Her eyes moved across the diagram. Server nodes, traffic distribution, backup paths, load allocation. 3 minutes passed. Daniel crossed his arms. 5 minutes. Linda checked her notes. At 7 minutes, Annie looked up. There. Danielle did not move. She pointed to the left cluster. Traffic reroutes through Node B during peak loads. So, the backup path overlaps. It's redundant. No, Annie said calmly. It's fragile. Daniel smiled. Explain. If Node B spikes, failover sends traffic into another overloaded route. She pointed again. You're protecting the server, not the path. Linda looked toward Ethan. Ethan sat forward slightly. Annie continued. Peak traffic hits Monday mornings? Daniel's expression changed. Why Monday? Because hospital systems sync weekend records before shift changes. Silence. Linda looked at the diagram again. Annie pointed lower. And this queue priority setting. What about it? Daniel asked. It favors processing speed over recovery. Daniel answered immediately. That improves efficiency. Until recovery starts failing. The room went still. Annie sat back. You asked for weaknesses. Nobody spoke. Linda looked toward Ethan. Daniel walked slowly back to the table. You've seen diagrams like this before. No. You guessed. No. Then how? Annie looked at him. Community clinic. Daniel frowned. Their computers froze every Monday. The room fell quiet. Ethan's fingers tapped once against the table. Just once. Linda closed her notebook. Daniel remained standing. Then Ethan spoke. What if she's right? Daniel looked over immediately. She isn't. You checked? It's theoretical. Annie said nothing. Ethan looked toward the screen. Run it. Daniel turned. What? Run the simulation. Linda blinked. Daniel stared at Ethan for 2 seconds. Then he picked up the tablet. The simulation loaded. Traffic increased. Node B spiked. Backup routing activated. The path overloaded. Warning indicators appeared across the diagram. Silence. Linda slowly lowered her pen. Daniel's jaw tightened. The room stayed still. Annie did not smile. Ethan looked at the screen for several more seconds before turning back. Miss Johnson. Yes, sir? Where exactly did you say you learned systems? Annie folded her hands. Mostly wherever people couldn't afford mistakes. Nobody moved. Daniel looked at the frozen warning screen behind him. For the first time since Annie entered Whitmore Systems, he looked less certain than annoyed. Ethan closed the interview file. We're done for today. Linda looked surprised. Daniel looked worse. Annie stood. Thank you for your time. She picked up her folder. As she reached the door, Ethan spoke again. Miss Johnson. She stopped. If we call you back, he said. How soon can you start? Daniel turned immediately. Annie looked at Ethan. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. The answer stayed in the room after Annie left. The conference room door closed quietly behind her. Daniel turned first. You cannot be serious. Linda gathered her notes without looking up. The exercise was fair. She got lucky. Ethan remained seated. No, he said. She noticed something. Daniel let out a short breath. A routing issue, on a simplified diagram. A routing issue your team approved. The room went still. Linda closed her folder. I'll wait outside. Neither man stopped her. The door clicked shut. Daniel walked to the window overlooking the city. You're giving this girl too much attention. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Why does that bother you? It doesn't. Then sit down. Daniel stayed where he was. Ethan opened Annie's file again. Repair shop. Community clinic. Volunteer projects. No corporate experience. No degree. No connections. Still, she had found the flaw faster than several applicants with polished resumes. Daniel turned around. She doesn't belong here. Ethan looked up. You said that in the lobby. Because it's true. No. Ethan closed the folder. It's because she makes you uncomfortable. Daniel laughed once. Come on. You challenged her personally in the interview. She challenged me first. No. Ethan's voice stayed calm. She answered questions. Silence settled between them. Daniel looked away first. Downstairs, Annie stepped outside Whitmore Systems into the late afternoon cold. Chicago had turned gray. People hurried home carrying coffee cups and grocery bags. A CTA train rolled overhead with its familiar metal scream. Her phone vibrated. "Mom?" "Well?" Annie smiled. "I think it went okay." "Okay? I solved a systems problem." "You solved a systems problem in front of the billionaire?" "I think so." Her mother laughed softly. Annie could hear dishes in the background. "Come home." Mrs. Alvarez brought pie again. "Apple?" "Of course, apple." Annie started walking toward the station. Behind her, 30 floors above the street, Ethan Whitmore stood alone in his office. The city stretched behind him. On his desk sat Annie's file. His phone buzzed. "Investors." Again. He ignored it. Instead, he pressed the intercom. "Linda." "Yes?" "Bring me candidate reports from the internship pool." "Tonight?" "Yes." 20 minutes later, folders covered his desk. MIT, Stanford, Northwestern, recommendations, research papers, corporate internships. Ethan flipped through them. Strong applicants, polished applicants, expected applicants. Then he reopened Annie's file. The difference bothered him. At 7:30, the office floor was almost empty. Daniel returned carrying his coat. "You're still here?" Ethan looked up. "So are you." "I had work." Ethan tapped Annie's file. So did she. Daniel remained standing. "What happens if you hire her?" he asked. "The staff will talk." "They already talk." "She has no background." "She has work. She has repair shops. She has results." Daniel's jaw tightened. Ethan noticed. "Tell me something," Ethan said quietly. "Why were you watching her in the lobby?" Daniel paused. "What? You recognized her?" "No." "Yes, you did." The answer came too quickly. Daniel looked toward the windows. "I watch everyone who walks into this building." "No," Ethan said. "You watched her." Silence. Then Daniel picked up his coat. "You're reading too much into this." He left. The door closed. Ethan stayed where he was. For several seconds he looked at the empty doorway, then at Annie's file. His eyes stopped on one line. Independent Systems Modeling. Under it, handwritten in blue pen, "Most failures begin where people stop looking." He read it twice. Across the city, Annie sat at the kitchen table eating reheated meatloaf while her mother watched her with tired eyes. "So?" Annie swallowed. "So what? What aren't you telling me?" Annie smiled. "You know me too well." Her mother waited. Annie set down her fork. "The systems director doesn't like me." Mrs. Johnson shrugged. "Then he has good judgment." Annie laughed. "I'm serious." "So am I." Her mother reached for the pie. "If people like you immediately, you're probably not changing anything." Annie looked down at her plate. The apartment radiator clicked softly. The evening news played in the background. Normal sounds. Small sounds. The kind people forgot. Her mother cut a slice of pie. "You still have that old laptop?" "Yes." "Charge it tonight." "Why?" Her mother placed the pie in front of her. "Because people don't ask when you can start unless they're already thinking about tomorrow." Annie looked up. Her mother smiled. At that same moment, Ethan Whitmore stood alone in the dark executive floor. He picked up his phone. "Linda?" "Yes, Mr. Whitmore?" "Prepare an intern contract." A pause. "For which candidate?" Ethan looked once more at Annie's file. "Annie Johnson." Down the hall, unnoticed by everyone, Daniel Reed stood frozen outside the half-open office door. And for the first time that day, he looked afraid. Daniel did not move until Ethan's office lights went off. The hallway outside the executive floor had already emptied. Cleaning staff rolled carts quietly between offices. The city outside the windows had become a field of lights. He stepped away from the door and walked back toward systems analysis. His office sat behind glass walls overlooking the west side of the building. Awards lined one shelf. Industry magazines sat stacked beside framed photos from conferences and technology summits. On the center wall hung the article that had changed his career. "Internal Innovation Saves Whitmore Systems Millions." Daniel looked at it for several seconds. Then he opened his desk drawer. Inside sat an old flash drive. Black, unmarked. His hand rested over it. A knock came at the door. "Still here?" Daniel closed the drawer immediately. Marcus Hill stepped inside carrying a laptop bag. Senior analyst. 5 years on Daniel's team. Good engineer. Quiet. Observant. "Big day?" Marcus asked. Daniel leaned back. What do you want? Marcus shrugged. People are talking. About? The girl. Daniel's face stayed neutral. Marcus continued. Reception says Ethan personally interviewed her. Reception? Of course. Nothing moved through this building without becoming gossip. She solved the logistics diagram too, Marcus added. Daniel looked up. You heard that already? Everyone heard. Marcus smiled faintly. Linda talks when she's impressed. Daniel stood and walked toward the window. She got lucky. Marcus did not answer. The silence lasted long enough to become noticeable. Daniel turned. What? Marcus looked away first. Nothing. No? Say it. Marcus adjusted the strap on his bag. She didn't look lucky. Daniel's jaw tightened. Marcus left a few minutes later. Daniel remained alone. He reopened the drawer. The flash drive sat exactly where he left it. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He ignored it. It rang again. He answered. Yes? A woman's voice came through. Mr. Reed? Yes. This is Angela from Archive Services. You asked last month about restoring old recruitment submissions. Daniel went still. Yes. We found the backup folders. His grip tightened around the phone. And? There are more files than expected. We'll need approval before deleting anything. Daniel's eyes moved toward the flash drive. No, he said quietly. Do nothing until I call back. He ended the call. Across the city, Annie sat cross-legged on the floor beside her old laptop. Her mother had gone to sleep an hour earlier. The apartment was quiet except for the radiator clicking and the distant sound of traffic. Annie opened a folder labeled Clinic Patches. Then another, Server Notes. Then one simply called Contest. She stared at it, did not open it. Her email chimed. Whitmore Systems. She froze. Slowly she clicked. Congratulations. We are pleased to offer you a provisional internship position. Annie read the message twice. Then a third time. Her hands shook. She stood so quickly the chair tipped backward. Mum. No answer. She ran toward the bedroom. Mum. The door opened immediately. Her mother looked alarmed. What happened? Annie held out the laptop. Mrs. Johnson adjusted her glasses. Read. Read again. Then covered her mouth. Neither of them spoke. Finally, her mother sat on the edge of the bed. They hired you? Provisional internship, Annie said quickly. It's not permanent. Her mother laughed through tears. Baby, yesterday they thought you were cleaning staff. Annie laughed too. For the first time since walking into Whitmore Systems, she allowed herself to feel it. Not victory, possibility. The next morning, Chicago woke beneath gray clouds. Annie arrived 40 minutes early. Sama hoodie, same backpack, different visitor badge. Intern access. The guard at reception stood as she approached. His eyes dropped to the badge, then back to her face. Morning. Annie nodded. Morning. He looked uncomfortable. I heard. He stopped. Annie waited. I heard you got in. Yes. He nodded once. Did not apologize. Did not joke. Just stepped aside. The elevator doors opened. Inside stood Marcus Hill. He glanced at the badge. You're Annie? Yes. He held out his hand. Marcus. Systems team. Annie shook it. The elevator started upward. Marcus smiled slightly. You know the whole department's talking about you? That doesn't sound good. It isn't bad either. He looked ahead. Mostly people are trying to figure out why Daniel Reed looks like he hasn't slept. The doors opened. The systems floor stretched before them. Rows of workstations. Large monitors. Live network dashboards. Teams already working. Marcus pointed ahead. Welcome to systems analysis. At the far end of the room stood Daniel. He was watching them. His expression did not change. But Annie noticed something she had not seen before. It was gone almost immediately. Still, she saw it. Fear. And people only looked like that when they believed the past might start walking toward them. Daniel stood near the operations screens with both hands in his pockets. The system's floor moved around him without slowing. Analysts checked dashboards. Monitors displayed traffic maps, server loads, logistics routes. Keyboards clicked. Phones rang. Coffee cups sat beside dual-screen setups. Marcus led Annie through the room. Most interns start with documentation, he said, maybe shadowing if they're lucky. Annie looked around. The place felt different from the executive floor, less polished, more alive. This is Operations East, Marcus continued. Infrastructure monitoring, diagnostics, routing behavior. Daniel runs the division. At the far end, Daniel finally walked toward them. Marcus. Marcus stopped. You're late to stand up. 2 minutes. 1 minute too long. Marcus nodded and moved off. Daniel turned to Annie. No greeting. No welcome. He handed her a badge. Temporary systems access. Desk 14. Annie looked toward the row of workstations. Desk 14 sat near the back wall. Small monitor. Older machine. No second screen. No headset. Everyone around it had better setups. Annie noticed. Daniel noticed her noticing. Problem? No. Good. He looked toward the floor. You're here to learn. He walked away. Marcus returned 10 minutes later carrying coffee. He glanced at the workstation and frowned. Seriously? Annie looked up. What? Marcus lowered his voice. Desk 14 hasn't been used in months. Annie looked at the old monitor again. It works. Marcus smiled. Yeah, you really are new. Before Annie could answer, a voice called from across the room. Morning meeting. People gathered near the main display. Daniel stood in front. Annie stayed near the back. Hospital systems rollout enters phase 3 this week, Daniel said. I want diagnostics complete before Friday. He clicked the remote. A network map appeared. Traffic routes. Recovery paths. Node groups. Annie's eyes moved automatically. Daniel kept talking. Monitoring team handles load review. Recovery team handles redundancy checks. He paused. Intern. Everyone looked back. Annie looked up. Daniel pointed toward a stack of printed files. Documentation archive. Organize them. The room stayed quiet. Marcus shifted beside her. Annie nodded. Okay. Meeting over. People returned to work. Marcus leaned closer. He gave you paper. It's work. No. Marcus looked toward Daniel. It's filing. Annie picked up the first box. Inside were old reports. Routing summaries. Archive diagnostics. She sat down. Worked. 30 minutes passed. Then something caught her eye. A report. Hospital traffic simulation. Monday load behavior. Annie stopped. She flipped pages. Recovery path. Node overlap. Her eyes narrowed. The same weakness. Not similar. The same. She stood. Marcus looked over. What? Annie held up the report. When was this made? Marcus glanced. About 8 months ago. Who wrote it? He checked the cover. Daniel's division. Annie looked back at the page. Recommendation ignored. Recovery overload risk unresolved. Her fingers paused on the final section. Implementation approved. She sat slowly. Marcus noticed her expression. What is it? Annie lowered her voice. The routing issue from the interview. Marcus frowned. What about it? It wasn't theoretical. Across the room, Daniel looked up. Their eyes met. Annie closed the report immediately. Daniel held the look 1 second longer than necessary, then returned to his screen. Lunch came late. Marcus brought sandwiches from downstairs. Turkey for himself. Veggie wrap for Annie. You didn't have to. You look like you forgot breakfast. Annie smiled slightly. Thanks. They ate near the windows. Below them, Chicago moved through noon traffic. Marcus nodded toward the operations floor. You know what people are saying? No. They think Ethan hired you to prove a point. What point? That talent matters more than credentials. Annie looked down at her sandwich. Marcus shrugged. I don't know if it's true. What do you think? He thought for a second. I think Daniel hates surprises. Across the room, Daniel stood talking with 2 analysts. One handed him a report. Daniel read it. His face changed. Only slightly. He looked toward Annie, then toward the archive box still sitting beside her desk. He ended the conversation immediately. A few minutes later, he appeared beside her workstation. What report were you reading? Annie looked up. Hospital routing archive. Why? It was in the box. Put it back. His answer came too quickly. Marcus looked over. Annie held the report. I noticed the recovery path issue. Silence. Daniel's eyes settled on the paper, then on her. Interns don't analyze archived reports. Why? Because I said so. He took the file from her hand. Not hard. Not gentle. Then he walked away. Marcus watched him go. That was weird. Annie looked toward Daniel's office. Glass walls. Closed blinds. File still in his hand. No. Annie said quietly. Weird is when people hide mistakes. Marcus looked at her. What was that? Annie leaned back in her chair. I think he already knew about the failure. The operations screens glowed across the room. Traffic moved. Data updated. Systems ran. And behind the glass office at the far end, Daniel Reed stood perfectly still, staring at the report he thought nobody had noticed. Daniel's office blinds stayed closed the rest of the afternoon. The report never returned to the archive box. Annie noticed. Marcus noticed her noticing. "You still thinking about that file?" Annie kept typing. "Yes." Marcus rolled his chair closer. "Look, Daniel can be difficult, but he's good at his job. I didn't say he wasn't. You implied it." Annie looked toward the glass office. "No," she said quietly. "I implied he already knew." Before Marcus could answer, an email notification flashed across Annie's screen. Internal review, hospital network update. Sender, Daniel Reed. Recipients, operations team. Her access allowed view only. She opened it. Subject line, recovery path optimization completed. Date, 8 months ago. Annie stopped moving. Marcus noticed. "What?" She turned the monitor slightly. Marcus read. His expression changed. "That's the same project." He looked toward Daniel's office. Maybe they fixed it later. Maybe. But Annie did not sound convinced. At 3 o'clock, the operations floor quieted. Several analysts left for client calls. Marcus moved to another desk. Annie stayed with documentation. Another archive box. Another stack. Old system reviews. Load summaries. Then, her fingers stopped. A printed architecture sheet. Titly. Adaptive Load Mapping Framework. Her heartbeat slowed. The room faded around her. She read the title again. Adaptive Load Mapping. The words sat on the page like something buried and suddenly uncovered. Below the title, author, Systems Division led, Daniel Reed. Anjestadet. Her hand tightened around the paper. Across the room, Daniel stepped out of his office. Their eyes met immediately. His face changed. Not surprise. Recognition. He started walking toward her. Fast. Annie lowered the page. Daniel stopped beside the desk. "What are you reading?" His voice was even. "Do even." Annie held up the paper. "This." Daniel took it immediately. "Archive material." "You wrote this?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. Marcus looked over from across the room. Annie stayed seated. "What is adaptive load mapping?" Daniel's eyes stayed on her. "Internal infrastructure methodology." "Can I read it?" "No." "Why?" "Restricted access." He slid the paper into his folder. Marcus stood now. The room had gone quieter. Daniel looked at Annie. "You have work to do." He turned away. Annie watched him walk back to the office. The door closed. Marcus came over immediately. "What was that?" Annie looked at the empty space on her desk. "Nothing." "That wasn't nothing." She stayed quiet. Because it wasn't. Hours later, the office began emptying. Monitors shut down. Chairs rolled back. Coats came off hooks. Marcus packed his bag. "You leaving?" "In a minute." He nodded toward Daniel's office. "He's still here." Annie looked. Lights on. Blinds closed. Shadow moving inside. Marcus hesitated. "You know, people used to talk about him differently." "Daniel?" "Yeah." "How?" Marcus leaned against the desk. "Brilliant. Fast. Built half the systems division." He shrugged. "Then about a year ago he changed." Annie looked up. "How?" "More defensive, more secretive." Marcus lowered his voice. "Started locking project folders. Stopped sharing drafts." "A year ago?" Marcus nodded. The timing landed quietly between them. Marcus left. The floor emptied. Annie shut down her workstation. As she stood, her phone buzzed. "Mum, how was work?" "Good." "You ate lunch?" "Yes." "You're lying." Annie smiled. "I had half a sandwich." Her mother sighed dramatically. "Come home, soup's ready." Annie packed her bag. As she walked toward the elevators, Daniel's office door opened. He stepped out holding his coat. They stopped several feet apart. Empty floor. Dim lights. Only cleaning staff in the distance. Daniel spoke first. "You like old reports." Annie adjusted her backpack. "I like systems." "Careful." "With what?" He walked closer. "Curiosity." Annie met his eyes. "You mean questions?" "I mean boundaries." The elevator dinged behind her. Doors open. Daniel stopped. His voice lowered. "You're an intern now." He looked at the closed office behind him. "Don't go looking for things that aren't your job." Annie stepped into the elevator. "What if they become my job?" The doors started closing. Daniel said nothing. But Annie saw it again. That same expression. Fear. The elevator descended. Daniel remained standing alone. After several seconds, he walked back toward his office, unlocked the door, opened the bottom drawer. Inside sat the black flash drive. He stared at it, then slowly closed the drawer again. Across the city, Annie sat at the kitchen table with chicken soup and crackers while her mother talked about work. Annie barely heard her. Adaptive load mapping. The name stayed in her head. Finally, her mother stopped talking. What is it? Annie looked up. Nothing. Annie. She set down her spoon. There was a document today. What kind? I don't know yet. Her mother watched her. You got that look again. What look? The one you get when something doesn't fit. Annie smiled faintly. Her mother shook her head. Just remember something. What? People don't protect things that don't matter. The apartment went quiet. Annie looked toward her old laptop sitting closed on the table beside her. For the first time in months, she thought about opening the folder labeled Contest. That night, Annie waited until her mother fell asleep before opening the old laptop. The apartment was quiet except for the radiator ticking and the hum of traffic outside. She clicked the folder. Contest. 3 files appeared. Submission copy. Draft notes. Source archive. Her hand stopped over the mouse. A year ago, she had built everything on this laptop, sitting at the kitchen table while her mother worked nights. She remembered library computers shutting down at closing time, coffee from vending machines, restarting crashed programs because the machine could not handle everything she was asking it to do. She opened the notes first. Pages of diagrams, load routes, recovery behavior, handwritten comments, adaptive load mapping, the same name. Annie leaned closer. The apartment seemed to disappear around her. Her phone buzzed. Marcus. She hesitated, then answered. Hey, you working? A little. You sound like you found something. Annie looked at the screen. Maybe. Marcus lowered his voice. You remember the report today? Yes. I checked archive access logs. Annie sat up. You what? Relax. I was curious. And? The document disappeared. Silence. What do you mean disappeared? I mean it's gone. He paused. Archive entry exists. File doesn't. Annie looked back at the laptop. Adaptive load mapping still filled the screen. Who deleted it? No record. Impossible. Marcus laughed quietly. Welcome to corporate life. Annie did not laugh, because she already knew impossible things happened. The next morning she arrived at Whitmore 20 minutes early. The system's floor was half empty. Marcus sat with coffee and a breakfast sandwich. You look terrible. He slept fine. You're lying again. Annie sat down. Daniel's office lights were already on. Marcus noticed her looking. He got here before me. What time was that? 6. Annie checked the clock. 7:15. Daniel stepped out carrying a tablet. The room changed immediately. People straightened. Conversations ended. He stopped beside Marcus's desk. Server review at 9. Marcus nodded. Daniel looked at Annie. Intern. Yes? Conference room B. Documentation sort. Marcus frowned. She's been doing documentation for 3 days. Daniel looked at him. And? Marcus said nothing. Daniel walked away. Annie picked up her notebook. Conference room B sat near archive storage. Inside waited 3 boxes. Paper again. Marcus appeared at the doorway. This is ridiculous. It's work. No. He stepped inside. It's hiding. Annie looked up. Marcus lowered his voice. He's keeping you away from systems. Before she could answer, footsteps sounded outside. Marcus straightened immediately. Ethan Whitmore entered. Both stood. Ethan looked at the boxes, then at Annie. What are you doing? Archive organization. His eyes moved to the labels. Documentation. Historical reviews. Paper records. No technical work. Marcus stayed silent. Ethan looked back at Annie. How long? Since yesterday. The room went quiet. Ethan turned toward the hallway. Daniel. His voice carried. Seconds later, Daniel appeared. Ethan. What is this? Daniel glanced inside. Training. For filing? Daniel folded his arms. She's an intern. Ethan looked at Annie. What systems access has she had? Daniel answered first. Limited. What analysis work? None yet. What diagnostics? None. Marcus looked away. Ethan stayed very still. Then he walked into the room. On top of one box sat an old report. Hospital Routing Archive. His hand paused over it. He opened the file. Recovery Path Review. Warning ignored. Date. 8 months earlier. The same document Annie had found. Daniel's expression changed. Only slightly. But Ethan saw it. Annie saw him seeing it. Ethan closed the file. Conference room, he said. Daniel stayed where he was. Now, 10 minutes later, Annie sat outside the glass walls of conference room, pretending to review papers. Inside, Ethan and Daniel stood facing each other. No raised voices. No visible anger. Still, the air looked wrong. Marcus sat beside her. What happened? Annie kept her eyes on the papers. I think Ethan noticed. Inside the room, Daniel spoke sharply. Ethan answered once. Daniel stopped moving. Marcus looked up. I've worked here 5 years. Annie turned. I've never seen anyone make Daniel nervous. The meeting ended. Daniel walked out first. His face was controlled again. He passed Annie without looking. Ethan stepped out seconds later. He stopped. Miss Johnson. Annie stood. Come to my office at lunch. Marcus looked between them. Daniel kept walking, but his pace changed, just enough for Annie to notice. Across the floor, monitors continued updating. Traffic flowed. Systems moved. And somewhere beneath all that movement, something old had started shifting. The kind of thing people buried because they believed time would keep it hidden. Lunch arrived, but Annie never made it to the cafeteria. At 11:55, an email appeared on her screen. From Ethan Whitmore. Subject, office, noon. Marcus leaned over from the next desk. That can't be normal. It probably isn't. Are you in trouble? Annie looked toward Daniel's office. The blinds were closed again. I don't know. At noon, she stepped onto the executive floor. Linda looked up from reception and smiled faintly. He's waiting. Ethan's office door stood open. He sat behind the desk reading a printed report. Not financial papers this time, archive documents. Come in. Annie, enter it. Ethan closed the file. Sit. She sat in the same chair as before. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Ethan slid a paper across the desk. Hospital Routing Review. The same report. You saw this yesterday. It was not a question. Yes. And? Annie looked down. The recovery path issue wasn't fixed. Ethan nodded once. Anything else? Annie hesitated. He noticed. Say it. She looked up. Someone already knew. Silence. Outside the windows, Chicago moved under gray skies. Ethan leaned back. Why do you think that? Because the warning existed. She touched the report. The risk was documented. And? It stayed. Ethan watched her carefully. Anything else? Annie thought about the archive file. Adaptive load mapping. Danielle. The missing document. She chose her words carefully. I found another report. Ethan did not move. What report? Adaptive load mapping. His eyes changed. Only slightly. What do you know about it? Nothing. That's not true. Annie looked at him. I know the name. Ethan turned toward the windows. For the first time since she met him, he looked older. Not tired. Heavy. You know, he said quietly, Whitmore Systems built its expansion around that framework. Annie stayed still. It changed logistics efficiency across 3 divisions. He looked back. Saved this company millions. The room went quiet. And Daniel built it? Annie asked. Ethan paused. That's what everyone believes. Before either could continue, the office phone rang. Linda's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Whitmore, Archive Services on line 2. Ethan pressed the button. Yes? A nervous voice answered. Sir, this is Angela from Archives. We restored old recruitment backups. Ethan sat straighter. And? There's an issue. Annie looked up. What issue? Ethan asked. Some submission folders don't match archive records. Silence. Angela continued. Files were moved. Ethan's expression hardened. When? About 11 months ago. Annie's hands tightened under the desk. Ethan's eyes moved slowly toward her. Angela kept talking. There are missing attachments too. Whose files? Papers shifted on the other end. Then, one applicant named Annie Johnson appears in the log. The room stopped. No sound. No movement. Annie looked at Ethan. He was already looking at her. Angela continued nervously. There's also another user account linked to the access history. Ethan's voice became very calm. Name. Pause. Daniel Reed. Nobody spoke. The city outside kept moving. Cars crossed intersections. People bought lunch. Trains passed overhead. Inside, the office time narrowed to one name. Ethan ended the call. Neither moved. Annie looked down at her hands. Her heartbeat felt loud now. Ethan stood, walked to the windows, stayed there several seconds, then turned. When did you first hear adaptive load mapping? Annie swallowed. A year ago. His eyes narrowed. How? She looked at the floor, then at him. I wrote it. Silence hit the room harder than shouting. Ethan did not speak. Annie continued quietly. I entered it into Whitmore's National Recruitment Challenge. The office seemed smaller now. I never heard back. She looked toward the report on his desk. Then I saw the name again. Ethan stayed perfectly still. You're telling me Daniel Reed built his division around your work? I'm saying I built it first. The room fell silent again. A knock came suddenly. Neither answered. The door opened anyway. Daniel stepped inside. He stopped immediately. Ethan standing. Annie seated. Archive files open on the desk. Nobody spoke. Daniel's eyes moved once. Hospital report. Archive notes. Then Annie. His face lost color. Only for a second. But Annie saw it. Ethan saw it too. Close the door, Ethan said. Danielle did not move. Now, the door shut softly behind him. Inside the office, 3 people stood with the same truth in the room, but only 2 of them already knew it. Daniel closed the door behind him. The office went silent. Ethan stood near the windows. Annie remained seated. Archive papers still lay open on the desk between them. Daniel looked at Ethan first. You wanted me? Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked back to the desk and picked up the archive report. Recruitment files, he said calmly. 11 months ago. Daniel's expression stayed controlled. What about them? Archive services found irregularities. Daniel glanced once toward Annie. Only once. Ethan noticed. Missing submissions, moved files. He placed the paper down. Your access account appears in the logs. Silence. Daniel gave a short laugh. That's what this is? Ethan waited. I reviewed recruitment materials last year. Daniel shrugged. Everyone knows that. You moved files. I organized files. Annie watched him. Too smooth. Too fast. Ethan folded his hands. One of those files belonged to Annie Johnson. Daniel looked at Annie again. This time longer. So? The word landed harder than he intended. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. So, he repeated. She says adaptive load mapping was hers. Nothing moved. Daniel stuttered. Then smiled. A small smile. Almost tired. Come on. No one answered. Daniel looked toward Annie. You're serious? Annie met his eyes. Yes. Daniel laughed again. Not loudly. Worse. Dismissively. You wrote one of the most successful infrastructure frameworks this company has used. I built it. You repaired laptops. I built it. Daniel looked back at Ethan. This is absurd. Ethan stayed quiet. Daniel stepped closer to the desk. Do you know how many people claim ownership after success? He shook his head. Students. Freelancers. Contractors. He looked at Annie. People see headlines and attach themselves to them. Annie stood. I still have the source files. The room stopped. Daniel's face changed. Only for a second, but Ethan saw it. Annie continued. Draft notes. Original models. Timestamp history. Daniel looked at her. No, you don't. The answer came before he could stop it. Silence. Nobody moved. Daniel realized it immediately. Ethan did too. The office became very still. Ethan spoke quietly. How do you know what she has? Daniel's jaw tightened. I don't. You answered fast. Because this is ridiculous. Ethan picked up the archive sheet. Sit down. Daniel did not move. Sit. Slowly he took the chair. Annie remained standing. Ethan looked at both of them. When adaptive load mapping entered production, who approved final architecture? Daniel answered automatically. My division. Who authored it? I did. Who reviewed submissions from the recruitment challenge? Silence. Daniel looked away. Ethan repeated the question. Who reviewed them? I did. Annie's fingers tightened around the folder at her side. Ethan nodded slowly. The pieces had started moving now. Not enough. But moving. The office phone rang. Linda, Ethan answered. Yes? Her voice sounded tight. Sorry to interrupt. Operations needs Daniel immediately. Daniel stood halfway. What happened? Linda paused. Hospital routing alerts. Everyone froze. Ethan looked up. What alerts? Recovery failures. The room went silent. Daniel grabbed his tablet. That's impossible. Linda continued. 3 hospital networks. Load spikes. Monitoring says fallback routing isn't holding. Annie looked toward the hospital report on the desk. Recovery path issue. Warning ignored. Daniel was already moving. Ethan stopped him. Conference room. 10 minutes. Ethan. 10. Daniel left. Door open. Door closed. Silence returned. Ethan looked at Annie. You saw this coming. It was not a question. Annie answered quietly. The warning was already there. He looked toward the city. Down below, people crossed streets and bought lunch and lived ordinary lives while systems carried their schedules, salaries, appointments, prescriptions. Broken systems never stayed inside computers. They always reached people. The intercom buzzed again. Linda, Mr. Whitmore. Monitoring teams confirm failures spreading. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. How bad? 3 hospitals delayed intake already. Annie stood still. Her mother worked nights in healthcare. She knew exactly what delayed intake meant. Waiting rooms, long shifts, missed records, people sitting in pain because screens froze. Ethan looked at her, then at the report, then at the door Daniel had just walked through. Come with me. Minutes later, Operations East no longer sounded normal. Phones rang. Monitors flashed warnings. Analysts moved between stations. Marcus stood at the main screen. Traffic maps glowed red. Daniel stood in the center giving orders. Shift recovery priority. Route traffic manually. Rebalance loads. Nobody noticed Ethan and Annie enter. Then Marcus looked up. Mr. Whitmore. The room changed. Daniel turned. His face tightened. Ethan walked to the main display. Hospital traffic. Recovery failures. Node overload. Exactly where Annie had pointed during the interview. Nobody spoke. Ethan looked at the screen. Then at Annie. What do you see? Every eye in the room turned. Daniel stepped forward immediately. She's an intern. Ethan did not look at him. What do you see? He asked again. Annie walked closer. Her eyes moved over the routes. Server paths. Recovery chains. Then she stopped. Her voice stayed calm. The system is protecting the wrong node. Marcus looked up. Daniel went still. Annie pointed. Failover keeps rerouting through the overloaded path. She looked at Ethan. It's repeating the same mistake. Silence spread across the room. Monitors continued flashing. Phones kept ringing. And for the first time since Annie entered Whitmore Systems, the entire department stood watching the girl they thought belonged downstairs. Phones kept ringing across Operations East. Red warnings flashed over the monitoring wall. Hospital intake delays. Recovery failures. Node overload. Analysts moved between stations with tablets and headsets. Someone near the back cursed quietly when another alert appeared. Annie stood beside the main display. The system is protecting the wrong node. Nobody spoke. Daniel stepped forward first. She's guessing. Annie looked at the screen. No. Daniel's voice sharpened. You've seen a routing map and suddenly you're an architect now? Marcus turned in his chair. Several analysts stopped typing. Ethan remained still. Annie pointed at the display again. Traffic fails here. Her finger moved lower. Recovery sends it back into the same pressure point. Daniel folded his arms. That route was tested. Not under this load. It was. Annie looked at him. Then why is it failing? Silence. The room stayed quiet long enough for another warning to appear. Marcus checked his monitor. Hospital 4 just turned red. Nobody moved. Ethan looked toward Daniel. Run the alternate route. Daniel answered immediately. No. The room froze. Ethan turned slowly. No? It'll destabilize logistics traffic. Annie looked at the map. No, it won't. Daniel looked at her. You don't know that. I do. How? Annie walked to the keyboard station. Marcus moved aside. Her eyes scanned traffic flow. Load distribution. Priority queues. Then she typed. Fast. People began gathering behind her. Marcus leaned closer. What are you doing? Checking path inheritance. Daniel stepped forward. Stop. Annie kept typing. Marcus looked at the output. His expression changed. Wait. Everyone looked at him. Marcus pointed at the screen. She's right. Silence. Daniel went still. Marcus kept reading. Recovery inheritance mirrors logistics routing. He looked up. Changing hospital priority won't affect shipping. The room became quiet enough to hear keyboards in distant departments. Daniel spoke slowly. That configuration isn't public. Annie stopped typing. Marcus looked between them. Ethan noticed. Annie turned toward Daniel. No, she said quietly. It isn't. Daniel started at her. For 1 second, the entire room disappeared between them. Then another alert sounded. Hospital 5. Critical. Marcus looked up sharply. We're spreading. Ethan made the decision. Run her route. Daniel turned immediately. Ethan. Run it. The order cut through the room. Nobody moved at first. Then Marcus sat down. Hands on keyboard. Daniel stayed frozen. Marcus looked at him. Sir? Daniel did not answer. Marcus executed the reroute. Traffic shifted. Node pressure dropped. Recovery path stabilized. One warning disappeared. Then another. Hospital 4 returned yellow. Silence spread across operations. Marcus looked at the monitor. It's working. Nobody spoke. Annie stepped back from the station. Daniel stared at the screen. Ethan looked at him. How long? Daniel blinked it. How long what? How long did you know the routing warning existed? The room stopped again. Daniel looked around. Employees listening. Analysts watching. Marcus unmoving. His voice came lower now. The warning was theoretical. Annie looked at him. It wasn't. Daniel ignored her. We tested internally. Marcus frowned. No, we didn't. Everyone turned. Marcus looked at Daniel. I reviewed rollout records last year. He swallowed. There wasn't a final simulation. Silence. Daniel's face changed. Marcus realized it immediately. Too late. Ethan stepped closer. No simulation? Marcus looked down. No, sir. The monitors continued updating behind them. Green returning slowly. Systems recovering. Ethan's voice stayed calm. Conference room. Now. Daniel did not move. Daniel. He finally looked up. The confidence was still there, but thinner. Across the floor, people pretended to work. Nobody actually was. Daniel walked toward the conference room. Ethan followed. Before entering, Ethan stopped beside Annie. You too. The room emptied behind them. Conference room A closed. Glass walls. City outside. Silence inside. Ethan stood at the head of the table. Annie sat near the end. Daniel remained standing. Ethan placed the hospital report down. Then, another document. Archive recovery log. Annie recognized it immediately. Daniel did too. His eyes dropped. Ethan looked at him. Adaptive load mapping. Nobody moved. You reviewed recruitment submissions. Silence. You approved deployment. Silence again. You ignored routing warnings. Daniel finally spoke. You think this is connected? Annie watched him. Ethan did not answer. Daniel laughed once. Small. Dry. Fine. He looked at Annie. You want the truth? Annie sat still. You submitted something. The room froze. Daniel continued. A year ago. Recruitment challenge. Ethan's face hardened. Daniel looked at Annie. It was unfinished. No. It was. No. He leaned forward. You were a student with ideas. I made them usable. Annie stood. I built it. Daniel looked back at her. And I made it matter. Silence hit the room. Outside the glass walls, people moved through hallways unaware that the foundation under an entire department had just started cracking. Ethan looked at Daniel. For the first time since Annie entered Whitmore Systems, there was no doubt left in his eyes. The room stayed silent after Daniel spoke. I made it matter. The words hung between the glass walls. Annie stood motionless. Ethan looked at Daniel as if seeing him from a distance for the first time. Daniel straightened his jacket. You want to act shocked? He looked at Ethan. Fine. Be shocked. He turned toward Annie. You submitted an idea. Raw architecture. No deployment structure. No scaling strategy. No enterprise adaptation. I built the framework. You built a draft. Annie's fingers tightened around her folder. No. Daniel laughed quietly. You think code alone changes companies? Ethan finally spoke. Enough. The room fell still. Ethan picked up the archive logs. You moved recruitment files. Daniel said nothing. You reviewed submissions. Silence. You deployed her architecture. Daniel looked at him. I improved it. That isn't what I asked. The office phone rang. Nobody moved. It rang again. Ethan answered. Linda's voice came through quickly. Hospital routing stabilized. No one reacted. But there's another issue. Ethan waited. Press team found the outage report. Pause. Board members want updates. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. I'll handle it. The call ended. Daniel folded his arms. This is exactly what I was protecting. Ethan looked up. Protecting? The company. Annie stared at him. Daniel continued. You think investors care where ideas come from? He looked toward the windows. They care if systems work. You stole it. Daniel turned immediately. I saved it. The room stopped. Annie felt something inside her go still. Daniel looked at her. You uploaded a competition entry. His voice lowered. I saw potential. I developed it. I deployed it. I kept this company ahead. No, Annie said quietly. You took it. Daniel laughed again. Do you know what happens to student projects? He shook his head. Most disappear. Annie stepped forward. I still have the source files. The confidence left his face. Only for a second. But it was enough. Ethan saw it. Daniel recovered quickly. Everyone has files. Timestamp history. Silence. Draft versions. Daniel looked at her. Original commit logs. The room became very quiet. Ethan turned slowly. You still have everything? Yes. Daniel's jaw tightened. Ethan walked to the windows. Chicago stretched beneath him. Hospitals recovering. Phones ringing. Employees working. A billion-dollar company built partly on something nobody had questioned. He thought about the lobby. The hoodie. The old backpack. The guard laughing. Then this. Behind him, Daniel spoke again. Ethan. He did not turn. You know how this works. Silence. People build on ideas all the time. Ethan still did not move. I carried this division. Nothing. I built your systems department. Ethan turned. No. His voice stayed calm. You built your career. The room went still. A knock interrupted them. Linda entered. She stopped immediately. Archive logs. Hospital reports. Nobody sitting. Nobody speaking. Sorry, she said carefully. Board call starts in 10. Ethan nodded. Cancel it. Linda blinked. The board? Yes. She looked at Daniel. Then Annie. Something in the room told her not to ask questions. She left. The door closed. Daniel looked at Ethan. You can't do that. I just did. You're risking investors. No. Ethan looked at him. I'm fixing a mistake. Silence. Daniel's face changed. The confidence was slipping now. Not much. Enough. Annie saw it. Ethan returned to the desk. Bring me everything. Daniel looked up. All deployment records. Recruitment reviews. Archive access. Ethan. Everything. The word cut through the room. Daniel started. For the first time since Annie met him. He looked tired. Not angry. Tired. Slowly he picked up his tablet. You're making a mistake. No. Ethan looked at Annie. I already made one. Nobody moved. The sentence landed harder than shouting, because everyone knew what he meant. The girl in the lobby, the laugh, the interview, the filing boxes, everything after. Daniel opened the door. Before leaving, he stopped beside Annie. You think this ends with justice? Annie looked at him. He smiled faintly. Companies don't work like that. He walked out. The door closed. Silence returned. Ethan sat down heavily. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he looked at Annie. When you walked into my lobby, she waited. I thought I knew exactly who you were. Annie stayed quiet. He looked at the folder in her hands. I was wrong. Outside the windows, clouds moved over Chicago. The city looked the same. Inside Whitmore Systems, nothing did. Annie slowly placed her folder on the desk. I brought more than my CV that day. Ethan looked up. She opened the folder. Inside sat an old flash drive. Black. Unmarked. The same kind Daniel had hidden. Annie set it between them. This is the original project. Ethan stared at it. Her voice stayed calm. I never deleted anything. The black flash drive sat between them. Ethan did not touch it immediately. The office had become too quiet. Outside the windows, Chicago kept moving. But inside Whitmore Systems, everything seemed to have narrowed into one object no bigger than a thumb. Annie pushed it slightly forward. Original files, draft versions, notes, source history. Ethan looked at her. You kept all of it? Yes. Why? Annie answered without hesitation. Because nobody believed me the first time. Silence. Ethan picked up the drive. The plastic felt old, worn smooth at the edges. He walked to his desk and inserted it into the laptop. Folders appeared. Adaptive, load, V1, drafts. Testing, commit history, archive. His hand stopped. Dates, 11 months earlier. Earlier than internal deployment. Earlier than Daniel's reports. The office door opened suddenly. Linda stepped in. Sorry, Mr. Whitmore, but the board... She stopped. Screen open. Files visible. Annie standing. Ethan silent. Linda closed the door quietly. What happened? Ethan turned the monitor toward her. She leaned closer. Read the timestamps. Then looked at Annie. Oh. No one spoke. The office phone rang again. Ethan ignored it. He opened another folder. Handwritten notes, scanned into PDF. Traffic behavior. Recovery paths. Annotation. One line highlighted in blue. Protect paths, not servers. The room went still. Ethan remembered the outage, the reroute, the recovery fix. Annie had solved it because she already knew it. Not because she guessed. Because she built it. A knock came. Nobody answered. The door opened anyway. Marcus stepped inside holding a tablet. Sorry. Hospital recovery is stable, but... He stopped. His eyes landed on the screen. Adaptive load mapping. Then Annie. Then Ethan. Marcus slowly lowered the tablet. What is that? Nobody answered. His eyes moved to Annie again. Understanding arrived slowly. Oh my God. The room stayed quiet. Outside the glass walls, employees moved through the executive floor unaware that an entire story was collapsing. Ethan opened the archive folder. Email copies. Submission receipt. Whitmore recruitment portal. Applicant, Annie Johnson. Submission time. 11:42 PM. Everything sat there. Intact. Untouched. Real. Linda lowered herself into a chair. Marcus remained standing. Ethan scrolled further. Then stopped. What is this? Annie stepped closer. On screen sat another folder. Internal comparison. She frowned. I didn't make that. Ethan opened it. Inside were screenshots. Whitmore deployment architecture. Annotation. Side-by-side comparisons. Daniel's implementation. Annie's original. Marcus leaned closer. They're identical. Silence. Not similar. Not inspired. Identical. Linda covered her mouth. Ethan sat back slowly. His face had gone completely still. The office phone rang again. He answered this time. Yes. Daniel's voice came through. We need to talk. Ethan looked at the screen. No. Pause. Ethan. No. He ended the call. The room remained silent. Annie stood near the desk. For the first time since entering Whitmore Systems, she looked tired. Not angry. Not relieved. Just tired. Ethan noticed. You carried this for a year. She nodded. Marcus looked at her. Why didn't you sue? Annie smiled faintly. With what money? Nobody answered. Linda looked down. Marcus looked away. The question stayed in the room because everyone knew the answer. Ethan closed the laptop, then stood. Conference room. Full executive review. Linda looked up. Today? Now. Marcus straightened. Ethan picked up the flash drive. And bring archive services. The intercom buzzed immediately. Reception. Mr. Whitmore? Yes? Mr. Reed is here. Silence. Ethan looked toward the door. What does he want? He says this concerns the company. Ethan's hand tightened around the drive. Send him in. Seconds later, Daniel entered. His tie was loose now. His face controlled, but his eyes moved immediately to the desk. Laptop. Open folders. Flash drive missing. He understood instantly. Nobody spoke. Daniel looked at Annie. Then Ethan. Then the screen still glowing behind the desk. What did you find? Ethan stepped aside. The monitor remained visible. Submission receipt. Timestamp. Name. Annie Johnson. Daniel stopped moving. Marcus watched him. Linda watched him. Annie said nothing. Ethan's voice stayed calm. You told me you made it usable. Daniel swallowed once. I did. Ethan looked at the screen. No. Silence. You copied it. Nobody moved. Daniel looked toward Annie. Then back at Ethan. You don't understand. Then explain. The room held its breath. Daniel looked at the files again. The timestamps. The notes. The architecture. everything he thought time had buried. His shoulders lowered, just slightly. I opened recruitment submissions that night, he said quietly. Nobody spoke. I saw her work. Annie stayed still. Daniel looked down, and I knew immediately what it was. Ethan's face hardened. Daniel laughed once. Small. Broken. The problem is, he looked at Annie. So did nobody else. Silence. He turned toward the windows. She would have been rejected. Annie's eyes narrowed. Daniel continued. No degree. No connections. South Side address. Community projects. He shook his head. The system would have ignored her. Ethan said nothing. Daniel looked back. So I took it. The room went silent. No excuses left. No language left. Only truth. And this time, everyone heard it. So I took it. Nobody moved. The office felt smaller after the confession. Marcus stood near the door with both hands hanging at his sides. Linda remained seated, eyes fixed on the table. Annie looked at Daniel without blinking. Ethan said nothing. That silence lasted longer than anger would have. Daniel looked toward the windows. You want me to say I hated her? He asked quietly. I didn't. He turned back. I respected the work. Annie's voice came low. You respected it enough to erase my name. Daniel looked at her. You think I don't know what this industry does? He laughed once. People like you don't get rooms like this. The sentence landed hard because everyone in the room had seen the lobby. The hoodie. The guard. The laughter. Ethan walked to the desk. He picked up Annie's flash drive. You made that decision for her. Daniel did not answer. You looked at her work and decided she didn't deserve her own future. Daniel's jaw tightened. I gave it a future. No, Ethan said quietly. You gave yourself one. Silence. Outside the office, people moved through hallways carrying coffee and laptops. Somewhere an elevator opened. Somewhere a phone rang. Inside the room, nobody moved. Linda finally stood. Ethan. He raised one hand. Not now. Daniel looked tired suddenly. Older. The confidence was gone now. What happens next? He asked. Ethan looked at him. You already know. Daniel smiled faintly. After 15 years? You should have thought about that 11 months ago. No one spoke. Daniel looked at Annie. I was going to fix it. She stared at him. When? Silence. When the company was stable? Nothing. When I had experience? Still nothing. When I stopped looking like someone security would mistake for cleaning staff? Marcus lowered his eyes. Daniel looked away first. Annie continued. You didn't save my work. Her voice stayed calm. You buried me with it. The room fell silent again. Ethan pressed the intercom. Linda. She looked up. Begin termination procedures. Nobody moved. Daniel closed his eyes. Only for a second. Marcus inhaled sharply. Linda stood still. Effective immediately? Yes. Daniel opened his eyes again. No anger now. Only emptiness. He removed his company badge slowly and placed it on the desk. The plastic sound seemed louder than it should have. Ethan looked at it. The badge that opened every door in the building. Now useless. Daniel picked up his coat. At the door he stopped. Without turning, he said quietly, You know what the worst part is? Nobody answered. I was right. Annie looked up. He turned toward her. They would have rejected you. Silence. Daniel smiled sadly. And that's why I thought I could do it. He left. The door closed. Nobody spoke. The room remained still long after his footsteps disappeared. Marcus sat down slowly. I can't believe this. Linda looked at Annie. I'm sorry. Annie shook her head. For what? Linda's eyes lowered. The lobby. Silence. The filing boxes. Another silence. All of it. Annie looked at the windows. Chicago looked exactly the same. Cars moved. People walked. Clouds crossed the lake. The world had not changed. Only one room had. Ethan returned to the desk. He picked up the flash drive, then held it out. Annie looked at him. This belongs to you. She took it. The drive felt lighter now. Ethan sat down. For the first time since she met him, he looked uncertain. I owe you an apology. Annie said nothing. I laughed. The room stayed quiet. I looked at your clothes before your work. He looked toward the badge Daniel left behind. I trusted the wrong person. He paused. And I almost lost the right one. Marcus looked away. Linda stood near the door silently. Annie held the flash drive in both hands. My mother says people show you who they are when they think you need something from them. Ethan looked up. She was right. The sentence hit harder than blame, because it was true. Ethan nodded once. Then he opened a drawer and removed a folder. Whitmore Systems, Junior Systems Analyst offer. Not intern. Full analyst. He placed it on the desk. Nobody spoke. Annie stared at it. Ethan looked at her. You came here asking for a chance. Silence. You already earned the job. Marcus smiled for the first time all day. Linda covered her mouth. Annie looked down at the folder. Then at Ethan. I thought you were hiring interns. Ethan leaned back. So did I. The room laughed quietly. Small. Tired. Human. Outside the office, someone from security walked past carrying a cardboard box. Inside it sat a framed article. Internal innovation saves Whitmore Systems millions. Daniel Reed smiled from the photograph. No one stopped to look at it anymore.